Okay. So this week's topic, we are going to talk about a library that Brandon Carpenter suggested to me called Click. Click is for creating command line interfaces elegantly. And Click, there we are. Click does all of its magic via decorators. And so I will post in the chat the link to the Click project. All of my examples that I'm going to be working with are going to be pulled from the documentation. And so you should be able to follow along. I will, post the different pages in the chat as I go, so you don't get lost. Also, I've increased the font size in PyCharm and my terminal here. Is this legible?
I can read it fine.
You can read it fine? Okay.
Looks good to me.
Okay, good. Thank you. I would have just shared my PyCharm window, but I couldn't figure out a good way to put the bash window in PyCharm. Doesn't work the way I expect, so I had to abandon that, unfortunately. Okay, so
the terminal window on PyCharm doesn't work?
It does, sort of, but like I tried to just print something to the console and then run the command through the bash window, and I'm on OS X, so who knows what's going on, and it wouldn't print any output to the terminal. That's so weird. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't have time to figure it out, so we're just going to go with this solution.
Okay.
In the future, I would rather just share the one PyCharm window and be done with it. Okay, and we can go ahead and hide that. All right. So to use Click, I have, as you can see in my virtual environment, I already have Click installed. So if you want to install Click, it's just a simple matter of pip install Click, and that will download and install it. It has no other requirements, although it can take advantage of setup tools. If you want to set up your application as a script that can be run directly. If we have time, we'll cover that. Yeah, Brandon?
If you're on Windows and you want colored output, which is one of the cool things you get with Click, you'll also need to install Colorom.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So let's look at a simple example here. So naturally, we're going to need to import Click. And then what we do is we define a function. So we're going to define a simple function. And like I say, I'm going to work straight from the examples, and I'm going to try and explain them as I go. And Brandon will jump in here and help, as I don't have nearly as much experience with this library as he does. So we're going to define a simple function. We're going to call it hello. And it's going to take two arguments, count and name. And we're going to, because we're good Python programmers, we're going to give it a documentation string. I'm just going to cut and paste this because we'll be here all day otherwise. Okay. And then our function is going to do something. So for x in range. Oh, and everything I'm doing, this is Python 3. Click works in Python 2 with some caveats that you have to be aware of. But we're going to be doing everything in Python 3 from now on. Python 2 is going away. So yeah, we're going to go count, and then we can do this one of two ways. We can do print, and then we can print something out. But Click also comes with an echo function that is basically a more versatile version of print. It does things like it handles if like Unicode is set up improperly in your terminal, it'll get work around that. It handles colored output elegantly, things like that. So we're going to use click echo, and then let's see, and then because I am in Python 3.6, I'm going to use this, and we're going to go hello name. We'll go ahead and do that right there. And so that will, with our function there, that will print it out that many times. Now, normally what you would do if you wanted to create a command line interface, this is you would import argparse, and you would do some argument parsing, and then you would call hello. So, but click allows us to do to decorate this function in such a way that it will automatically create the command line interface for us. So the first thing we need to do is we need to declare that this is a command. So click.command. And now our hello function is now a command. And then we're going to need to give it options because we have a count argument and a name argument, and we need to supply those. So we're going to do click.option. And then we're going to give our option a name. And we'll say, since our first parameter is count, we need to specify the count parameter first. We're going to give it a default of 1, and we're going to give it a help string. And let's see, so number of greetings. Okay, so this adds the count option as opposed to argument. So this is optional, as the name option implies. And we have a help string of number of greetings. Then we're going to do another option. And we're going to call this one name. And we are, we're going to add a prompt to this. So if they do not supply a prompt, it will ask them for it. So the prompt's going to read your name. And then we'll do help equals person to greet. Okay. All right. Now we've turned this into a command, but we still have to make sure that it gets executed properly. So we're going to do if. Now we could just call hello. That would work. But if we're doing this if we want this to be Pythonic, we do if name equals main. And then we're going to call hello. This way, if somebody imports our module, it won't execute the hello function just willy-nilly. All right. So this is our first program using click. So let's come over here to our terminal and let's run it. So if we go Python hello, we're going to get a syntax error because I screwed up. All right, there we go. Okay, so you'll notice that it prompted me for my name. So this is what the prompt option does in our hello. So we're going to go Kyle, and then it's going to say hello Kyle once, and that's because our default value for our count is 1. We can also specify count. You can actually you can do this, or you can just do a space. It doesn't matter. So 3 times, and same thing. We can then also specify the name, and it will do the right thing. It also generates help text or a help message automatically, like so. Now you'll notice that it said simple program that greets name for a total of count times. Well, that is taken straight from our documentation string. So click does uses the existing facilities for documentation so that you're not documenting your code twice. If you were using argparse, you would have to put a general help message from it, which would oftentimes be an either you would either not do a documentation string in the function that it is called, or you would basically have the same information duplicated twice. So this saves you from expressing that information more than once. So that's the simplest example that we can give. All right. So let's look at this in. So let's look at some of the features that we can take advantage of. So we do also support arguments. And let's go ahead and start a new file that gives us an example of that. Touch file. Okay. So per usual, we're going to import click. And we're going to create a command. And I'm taking my example from the section on arguments in the documentation. So we're going to do click command. We're going to do click argument. And then we're going to specify our function name. So we'll call it touch and file name. Our argument we need to specify is going to be file name. And we'll just go ahead and echo the file name. Okay. And then we'll grab this from here. Why is it complaining? Oh, there we go. All right. So now we're going to run Python file name. And we, unlike an option, arguments are required. So this is, if you've dealt with argparse, it's the same thing. And you'll notice that, let's see. So it automatically does the appropriate thing if you're missing arguments. Unlike options, arguments are required and they're positional. Let's see. Although there is actually a switch that you can make options required, which I thought was very cool. So let's go file name, my file, and then it just prints it out. Okay, so that's a simple example of arguments. You can also specify the number of arguments, and args equals, let's see, 3. Now we're expecting 3 arguments. And instead of giving us a single entry, it gives us a tuple with all of the arguments. If we leave one off, argument file name takes 3 values. Okay. Another thing that we can change is we can of course do multiple arguments, and so they're just when when you're defining your arguments or your options, you define them in the order that you expect to pass them into the function. So let's do click.argument, and we'll do destination, and we'll do number of arguments is 1. We'll change this to source because we're going to follow an example here. And we're going to change this to -1. So what this will do is it will allow us to specify, it'll basically take all of the source arguments or all of the arguments and assume that they're part of source until there's one left, and then that goes into destination. So let's see. DST and that. So the first, our first argument goes into a list of, or a tuple that's only one long that goes in, which comes from our first argument, and then our last one goes into our destination argument. So if we put more arguments, it would take them off the beginning until we had one left. And of course, you can flip this. You can have a single argument and then an indeterminate number of arguments after that using the -1 number of argument counter. And of course, if you use you can't use -1 more than once because then it becomes ambiguous. Let's see. Biopath arguments. Okay. So let's look at, let's go and look at options and what we can do with those. And I'm just going to rename this to a generic test so I don't have to keep thinking about what it's called. Okay. So to specify an argument, as we saw in our first example, or an option, excuse me, we have to give the option a name. Now we can give it more than one name, and we can give it a short name with a single dash, or we can give it a long name with a double dash. And it will automatically take this name and rename it with underscores. So now these are equivalent. Okay. And we can refer to this or we can, so we can refer to this argument by -s or --, string to echo. And that will, and this long name determines what the variable is called. Now, if we specify a third argument, that becomes our variable name, like that. Let's go ahead and test this out. And what happens if we run it without anything? So if we run it without anything, string gets populated with nothing. So if we do -s, test, now it prints out test. And of course, if we want to do something longer, we have to, since this is in order to put it all together in bash, we have to specify quotes. All right. So then we have our basic value options. So things that you're going to be using commonly to extend how options work. So let's do -n. And we are going to do that right there. We're going to specify a default equals 1. And then we'll do string n string times n. Okay, so what this will do is now, because we specified a default and the default is of type integer, click automatically says, okay, this needs to be an integer. So if we do if we specify our options again and we don't specify n, it just uses 1. If we do n is 2, it does it twice. And then this, I'm not sure what it's going to do. Yeah, invalid value for n, test is not a valid integer. So when we specify a default, we are we are implicitly declaring the type of that option. Now, if we don't specify a default, or we want to specify a different type or multiple types, we can do when we want to be clear on what our type is, we do type equals int. If we don't specify a type, then the assumption is that if we don't specify a default or a type, the type is assumed to be an int. So now, if we did that, and actually, I'm curious as to what happens in this case. It probably, yeah, not an integer. If we leave n off, cannot multiply, not int, sequence of non-int of type, none. Okay, so it looks like it sticks the none in there. I was just curious to see what it would do. So in this case, we're going to need to, since we're not specifying a default, we can specify required equals true, like that. Now, if we leave it off, this is going to say missing option -n. So we'll go -n 3. And now it prints it out 3 times. Okay. If we want to use a reserved word, of course you can't call a variable name something like for or from. So what the canonical way to handle this is to stick an underscore at the end. Something like that. And that's a common workaround. You see it in functions that want to have a variable name ID. Either give it a more explicit name than ID, or they'll put an underscore at the end. I've seen both, but that's how you would handle this case. Let's see. All right. We can also do some minor changes to how the help is displayed. We can go show default equals true. And if we do options -help, then it'll say n is an integer, default is 1. We did not put a help message here, so let's throw a help message in real quick. And now it automatically adds a default to the end of the help message. Are we doing? Wow, it's already 12:37. Okay, we can have multi-value options. So we can do, of course. So we can do, also do number of arguments. ARGS, much like we could with the with our arguments. We can specify the number of arguments for our options, and as we and so when we specify the switch, we are going to give it more than one argument. Again, this will become a tuple when we get it when it's calls our function, and so it's up to us to do the appropriate thing with the with the tuple that we get back. We can also specify, in fact, I will go ahead and just copy this one verbatim. We can also specify multiple arguments through the type argument. So the way you do that is like this. Okay. So this is saying that our item option requires two arguments. The first one's a string. The second one's an integer. And it will take and it will treat those position the arguments to item as a string as an integer appropriate accordingly. So let's do this. So it says item text integer. So if we call item, actually first thing we'll do is we'll call it without any arguments to see what it does. So that's going to be an error. So let's go. There's probably a way to stop that from exploding in this case. Something like that. And so then our item let's see, error item option requires two arguments. So that handles that case. I am curious as to what's the appropriate way to do the error checking in this case if you call it, because if you call it without any arguments, it explodes. Brandon, do you have any feedback on that?
I'm sorry. I didn't catch what the error was.
Well, I have an option set up like this: item type string, and then it attempts to call this function. Well, if I fail to specify the item option, I get this rather ridiculous unhandled exception. It would appear that n args is set to conflict with the composite type arity.
I've never seen that one before. I'm assuming it's because it's using a tuple for the type.
Yeah, but that's you're supposed to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So you could do that right there. And then so it behaves correctly unless you leave it out. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder if that's a known bug in Click.
Yeah, maybe if you give it a default, you could get around it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna. So after this meeting, I'll take a minute and I'll go through Click's open issues, and I'll see if anybody's mentioned that, and I'll submit a bug report. Otherwise, that was interesting. Okay. We can also support using an option multiple times, like this. And we're going to rename that. Okay. So if I call it without the argument, it does nothing, because message is going to be an empty tuple. So we just get a new line. Then I can do -m. Ooh. So that prints out that. But multiple allows me to do something like this, where I can specify the command line argument more than once. And then what it does is it joins them all together in a tuple. And so messages in this context then becomes a tuple, which we are then subsequently joining with new lines to get the resulting output. This is nice. So we have a counting option. And if you've ever tried to set up traditional verbosity option handling in argparse, this is nice. So this says count the number of times we see this argument. And so you can do something. So you can do, let's see. So verbosity equals 0 because I've specified it 0 times. You can go -v, that's 1. -v is 2. Or you could do VV, which is what you commonly see for very verbose, or very, very, very verbose. That's a kind of a tongue twister. So that's handy. Let's see. We have this is fancy here. So you can set up Boolean flags that can be enabled or disabled, and there's a couple of ways you can do it. So I think you can specify a Boolean flag. So let's do this guy right here. You can specify a Boolean flag. Oh, it's complaining because I don't have a new line. Where shout then becomes, it gets turned into a Boolean. Is a flag is true. So if shout is not specified, if you leave shout, you don't include the shout option, shout becomes false. If you do include it, it's true. So let's just demonstrate that. So we're running on Darwin, and then if we do -- shout, we get the conditional code path here. We can also have, we can also specify an enable or a disable flag. So we can do something like this right here, where we can give the true or the false versions of the flag, and then we give it a default. So if we don't specify shout, we get the no shout version, or we could specify no shout if we want to. So without the option, with the option, and then with the false version of the option. So that's pretty cool. Let's see. There is some handling for Windows style. There is some stuff for Windows style options, so where you can put slashes instead of dashes. Although, why would you want to do that?
Can I mention something as well?
Sure.
So with regard to the types, I know argparse has something like this too, where you can specify the type to be a file.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that with click as well, and tell it to test whether the file exists or doesn't exist, and then it will try to open it as well, given the mode. And if it fails, produce a message, an error message. So it kind of handles some of that, typical file handling argument stuff for you.
Right. And in fact, I wanted to make a point of covering that because, we're kind of running low on time here. Let's see. Other prefix range. Oh, they don't have it in here. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and jump over to the file handling stuff right now. But so this kind of gives you an idea of the kind of stuff that you can do in Click. Click also supports subcommands, commands and subcommands, or through groups. Let's see, where is the printing bash Python 3? I don't see in the documentation where the oh, here we are, file arguments. So so this is something that is there a section on just files in here, Brandon?
There's a section in the documentation that talks all about files. Yeah.
Where is that? Because I see the section under arguments, but
yeah, file arguments and file path arguments.
Yeah, but that's specific to arguments. Can you do something similar with an option?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you just specify the option and give it the type. It's same kind of thing.
Okay. So let's look at that real quick. So even though the example I'm using is in the context of an argument, as Brandon said, you could do the same thing with an option if you were so inclined. So I'm just going to copy and paste this example from the arguments section. Okay. Why is it complaining? Oh, I missed a character. There we go. And we're not using this anymore. Okay, so what this does is this, so you specify two arguments, an input and an output, and it does write bytes, and it opens with the file, the mode read bytes and write bytes. That's what I'm looking for. And so this will automatically intelligently handle the files for you. Now there's a whole slew of arguments for the file type. You know, it has to, as far as like whether or not it exists, and anything you can imagine you can do. So you would put, there's more arguments to this file type here. So you can give it different behavior. Oh, also, there's also a path argument as well, which you wouldn't specify read or byte, but you could do like path equals true or something. So this will automatically create the file if necessary. And it will also automatically handle the dash type argument as well. So traditionally in Unix command lines, if it says, well, we need an output file, and you specify a dash, that's shorthand for standard out. Same thing with input. If you don't want to specify, if you want to like enter your input on the through the console, you can specify dash, and it'll start reading from standard in, and that allows you to automatically do things like now Brandon, this is actually a question for you. So if we pipe something to this command, we need to specify the dash, right?
Yes.
Okay. So to demonstrate how this works, we're going to do Python. Let's see.
Sorry, I'm going to qualify that yes with unless the default is standard in.
Unless the default is standard in. Okay. All right, that makes sense. Okay. We'll do that. Do this. Okay. Python arguments. And so if we do minus and then hello.txt, it will start reading from standard in. Oh, no. I don't know how to send a file on the Mac.
Command D or Control, it should be Control D. Oh, that's what you tried, huh?
Well, let's see. Control D. Yeah, Control D gives me another thing. And then if I do that, I get that. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, is it there? No? Oh, that just put it in the background. Well, fantastic. I don't know. Let's see.
We tried Command C.
Command C. Well, that aborts it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to send an end of file, and I'll have to look it up. I'm using iTerm 2, and so there's some hairs that I'm still not familiar with how it works. But in short, it will read from input until you send an end of file, and then it will finish up. So yeah, so that's a simple example of reading and writing from files. Okay, so we're about out of time. Are there any questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah, go for it.
So one of the things I love about Click is that it's not just about command line parsing. specifically if you go to the section in the documentation on their utilities, they offer other cool things like with the click.echo, you can include some specialized code in there for it to colorize output. You can use it to, Click can tell you the size of your terminal. It can clear the screen for you. You know, there's many other things that it gives you. So, you know, kind of following the Python philosophy of batteries included, Click gives you almost everything you would normally want when writing a command line application, which is one of the reasons I love it.
And I'm still just learning it. So this topic was completely Brandon's suggestion, and so far I like what I see. And I've seen some of the things Brandon has had to do to get argparse to do what he wants. And so if he's happy with the library and has found no major shortcomings in it, then it almost automatically gets a thumbs up from me. In fact, speaking of that, are there any shortcomings to Click that you found that you would warn people about?
None thus far.
Well, that's really good.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, typically when I've used argparse in the past, I almost always have to do something to override the default behavior. I haven't had to do that with Click.
Well, that's good. Some of the stuff I see is really encouraging for me. Traditionally, I've just always used argparse, but it's not very often that I personally write from scratch a command line tool where I hit the limits of argparse really hard. But I've seen, like in Voltron, for instance, if you look at how it does its command line parsing, it's scary. And looking at the Click documentation, I could see how we could simplify a lot of our code in the command line handling for Voltron, and especially like the Voltron control commands and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm excited to learn more about it. Okay, well, thanks for showing up. Oh, Chandrika?
I was gonna say, like, no, does Click have like good support for the help text? That was one of my gripes about like the argparse when you have subcommands. I don't know if you remember, Kyle, we were discussing about this a while ago. Like for the Voltron control, when you have subcommands, the help text like will automatically be generated at the top level. It'll say whatever your command, subcommand, and then the options of it would be just like the subcommand's name itself as capitalized. It won't give you, there's no way for you to say, okay, use these variable names as options. Like you,
okay.
it doesn't say, okay.
Oh,
Command one
if
dash
you don't...
dash or Voltron control dash dash RabbitMQ.
Yeah.
Then our first argument is you want to say type, or second argument as something file for file name. You cannot say that as file name, the variable name as file name and type. It'll just give you RabbitMQ.
So this is like the help that you get if you don't explicitly ask for help and you do it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a difference in at least with my experience in argparse, is it really does what you want to. If you say like Voltron control config or something like that, minus help, then it gives you something reasonable. But if you like mess it up, then it's like then the help it gives you is like, eh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but it looks like they're going for brevity, just to kind of tell you what you did wrong. And as far as I can tell, Click kind of uses that philosophy, because I think that's like a general Unix philosophy as to how to present a message when you did something wrong. It would be, so I would look in the documentation on like grouping, because that's the concept that's what they call it for doing subcommands, is you have like command groups and stuff, and you hook them together. It's similar but simpler than how argparse does it, but it's still the kind of the same thing where if you mess up, you get a more terse help message.
Okay.
But if you do ask for the help, it gives you like the full blown exploded out.
Okay. I was just curious. That was just one of them.
No, that's a good question, and yeah, and I remember when we were talking about that. It can be kind of confusing. So it would be interesting to compare like click versus argparse and the help it generates in different circumstances, and the big one being, of course, as you mentioned, you use the command wrong. What does it tell you? So, okay,
Take a look, yeah.
all right. I don't have anything else, and it's been an hour, so let's call it a day. Unless anybody else has questions, I'm perfectly happy to stick around.
You can probably look it up too, but do you know if it has any built-in facilities for tab completion?
So tab completion is not a function, is a function of your shell. And so, for instance, like when you use get, and you can do like get clone, and you can start, or no, you can do like get branch, and you start typing in the branch name, and you hit tab and do a tab complete. What it is there's your operating system has something installed for get for bash that teaches it how to do those completions. And I looked it up once, and it was something that we were considering doing in Voltron. But basically, you have to basically teach Bash how to look up the completions for a particular program. And of course, somebody is, for instance, for Git, somebody has done a lot of work to make that work properly in Linux. But
to answer the question, Click does provide support for generating that file that Bash can use for command completion.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Neat.
It also, you can also pass in your arguments options as environment variables. It provides built-in support for that.
Yeah.
Batteries included.
Yep. Now, I would like to see how it could generate that file for Bash. Like I said, I looked into doing one for Voltron, and I decided that it was, well, at the time it was more effort than it was worth. But there are places where it would be really useful for like managing your configuration store. But yeah,
It'd be really useful there.
Yeah. So it's but at the same time, your command line completion has to like when you hit tab, it has to like, it has to have basically a Voltron config or Voltron control config command that it can do to basically get the list. And so it's like it'll be the completion will be slow because it's got to run Voltron control, and Voltron control needs to talk to the platform, and there's always a slight hitch there. So you could certainly get it to work. The other thing that you could do to make it faster is have the command line completion, instead of going and looking, trying to talk to the platform, it could actually look up your Voltron home and go find your config store and use that, because then you could just do it immediately. Because any command, as far as I know, any command line completion you would want to do, you could extract that information by looking in the file system rather than actually going through the platform, now that I think about it. So yeah, no, I feel your pain, man.
Yeah, I usually just change to whatever directory the config store stuff is. Yeah, the drivers are all in or something, so that I can use the built-in tab completion in the shell. But yeah,
so you've got like a
kind of a manual shortcut.
So so your layout on your file system is exactly the same as what it is in the config store. Yeah, no, I totally get that. That's actually pretty good. I like that. Well, okay. All right. Yeah, I would be. Well, now I'm curious, Brandon. I wanna look up and see what Click does to automatically generate that file, because that's really cool. So okay. I will talk to you guys later. Thank you for coming. And I'll send out more information soon about how you can officially sign up to the group. And then I'll have an official channel for sending out updates and doing all that stuff. So, all right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep.